These encounters I've had with these shadow-like entities in the past 2 years. To start, I've never done any hallucinogenic drugs or anything of the sort. I'm in the military and it's way too hard to get away with that stuff to begin with. From what I can remember, all of this started happening to me when I was stationed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma for my military job training. Late one night, I was sleeping in my bunk when I suddenly woke up to what looked like a black figure walking into my room. Wiping the sleep out of my eyes and sat up thinking that it was one of the guys on fire guard that night taking head counts for the sergeant on CQ. Fire guard is just one of the guys that watches over the barracks during the night to make sure no funny business happens. Just as soon as I sat up to greet the guy walking in, it dissipated into nothingness. Really confused, I looked at the top bunk and saw that my bunkmate was up from his phone screen lighting up the ceiling. I spoke up and said, "Hey Long, did you see someone walk into our room just now?" He paused and looked down from the top of his bunk at me and said, "Nah man, fire guard came in like an hour ago. You were knocked out for the night." This time I simply just brushed the encounter off and a really strange occurrence and nothing else. Fast forward to January of 2018, I started college at the University of North Dakota, UND. This is when the encounters got really bad to the point where I was too afraid to go to sleep some nights. I lived in a really old dorm building called Squires Hall, built way back in the day, by myself. The encounters I had didn't all have these shadow people while I was there, so I'll share everything of note. One night I went to bed and woke up to a tall shadow person standing in front of the door of my room with crimson eyes that seemed to stare right through me. I sat up in my bed and freaked out. Side note, I don't consider myself a very religious person at all, more like agnostic to clear everything up, so you can imagine my fear seeing these things. After what felt like an eternity, having a staring contest with this entity, I shouted at it, "What do you want with me?" It took one big step towards me, shook its head, and in a feminine voice said, "Help." With that, it vanished into the darkness in the room. Another time that really stands out was when it was the end of the spring semester, the last week of school. I had most of my room and clothes packed up and ready to move out, for after my finals are done, I had a couple of cans of Coke in the back of my mini fridge by the door in my room. One night during that week, I went to bed and woke up to a loud bang. I sat up in my bed and looked towards where the noise came from in my room, towards the door. There, standing in front of my door, was a black figure. It took one step towards me next to the fridge and pointed down at it and disappeared. I turned on the lamp on my bed and walked over to my fridge, opened it, and looked into it. There in the back of the fridge, a can of Coke exploded. An example of the non-shadow people things I see. While I was at UND, I had a long-distance girlfriend for over a year. We started dating in high school, and when I enlisted in the military, she started school in the College of St. Scholastica, a private college in Duluth, Minnesota. So at the time of the story, we had been dating for over a year and everything was great, although she had a grandfather at the time who was very sick. One night I woke up and at the foot of my bed I saw 3 figures standing at the foot of my bed in my dorm room. On the right there stood my girlfriend from the past, a little girl with a silly bob haircut and a pink dress from a photo that I once saw of her. In the middle was my girlfriend from the present. Long blonde hair, leggings, and a sweatshirt. Then on the left was my girlfriend from the future. She wore a long black dress, as dark as the night with long black hair. Where her face should have been was just a black, messy blur unlike the other figures beside her. Brushing off the incident, I didn't think anything of it. I didn't tell her about what I saw that night. 2 days later, I got a phone call from her crying. She told me that the grandfather that she was so close to had passed away, and that she wanted to take a break from our relationship to try and figure everything out. After the call ended, I thought back to what I saw that night and analyzed what that third figure might have been trying to tell me. The black dress symbolizes death like the clothes you wear to a funeral, and the blurry black face meaning she would break up our relationship to deal with her grandfather's death. Somehow I had a clairvoyant vision of the near future. Other times I hear people in my room while I'm trying to fall asleep, other people trying to speak to me or talking to someone else in the room. Most of the time I'll hear people whisper my name in my ear while I'm laying in bed trying to fall asleep. That summer I went to a psychiatrist to make sure that I wasn't going crazy. From the sessions I had and the stories I told him, I wasn't schizophrenic, but I was diagnosed with a kind of sleeping disorder called hypnagogic, falling asleep, and hypnopompic, waking up hallucinations. Basically, as I'm either falling asleep or coming out of sleep, certain parts of my brain either go to sleep or come out of a sleeping state slower and faster than other parts, making me have visual and auditory hallucinations. Hearing all of this, I still have my doubts. I don't doubt his credibility or anything, but I think that there's more to this than I'm just hallucinating. This one is an unexplained encounter and a bit long. About 6 years ago, over the summer of my junior year, going into my senior year of high school, I experienced something I can't quite shake off to this day. My friend's parents were going out of town for the weekend, so myself and 3 others, including Matt, planned a sleepover so we could all hang out, be as loud as we wanted. We slept over at my friend Matt's house. His house was located on the east side of town where that small wooded area was located. I mentioned this area in a previous post about the scream I heard in my house. That night, we all mentioned how we should sleep on his trampoline since it was warm that night and none of us had done it before. Matt was a little concerned with the idea because he had mentioned that homeless people and sometimes deer wander in and out of the little forest next to his house. There was no fence separating us from the woods, so anything could go in and out of the yard into the forest and vice versa. I told him we were going to be fine and that there was nothing to worry about. Boy, did I wish I could take that statement back. We started setting up our spots on the trampoline, getting cozy and just hanging out, looking at our phones. About an hour into this, I started to hear twigs snapping and leaves crunching. Matt was the only one who wasn't on the trampoline, but sitting on a small river donut on the deck next to the trampoline. He was sitting on this due to an injury that happened to him a few weeks prior to these events. I was looking at Matt while all of this was happening, and he was looking into the woods. He didn't say anything other than a quiet, "I told you this was a bad idea." I kept listening for a few minutes, and then it stopped. My friends were all listening too, but they didn't seem concerned. It was really quiet after it stopped. None of us said a thing. We all looked back on our phones, and then that's when I saw it. The second my eyes met my phone, I saw from my peripheral vision this 7 to 8 foot tall thing run out of the woods, into the backyard, and darted to the side of the house. All we saw was the silhouette or whatever it was. It was almost as if it was ghostly. It was extremely thin and bipedal. Here's the kicker though. We saw it run, but we didn't hear it run. It made zero sound when it was moving, but it made the motion of someone running. When we saw this, we all did the exact same thing, screamed and ran off the trampoline. Matt was the first one inside, and I was surprised he was even able to walk, let alone run, because of his injury. We left some blankets and pillows outside because we were in such a hurry. We shut and locked the sliding door, all of the windows and doors we could find. We kept looking out some of the windows to see if we could see anything, but there was nothing. Because we were so startled, we stood up until sunrise to finally go to sleep. I think about what happened on an almost daily basis. Everyone I have told has a theory that it escaped from the mountains next to the forest. For a little backstory, I live in Magna, Utah. The mountains on the east side that separate us from Tuella are said to house some sort of secret military base where experimentation and other things are done on who knows who or what. This story was relayed to me by a colleague and friend. Before joining our organization, this colleague worked as a tour guide. At this time this story happened, he worked for a tour company that specialized in Japanese and Korean tourists, and he was assigned to work the trips going to the east coast of peninsular Malaysia. It should be noted that there now is a major highway that links the east coast and west coast, but at the time, the highway was in the process of being built, and while most of the highway was intact, there were still stretches where you would need to take the trunk roads through towns and villages before rejoining the highway some miles ahead. He was supposed to meet a small group of Japanese tourists at the airport and escort them on their small bus to Kuantan, a major tourist town on the east coast, which was more than 4 hours away at the time. The weather was bad that night and the plane was delayed. By the time they go on their way, it was already 9 p.m. A little more than an hour out of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia's capital, a member of the tour group asked my friend if there was somewhere that they could stop to get something to eat because some of the tourist members were famished. My friend said he would do what he could. He then asked the same to the driver. This was not their regular driver. He was standing in for the regular driver who unfortunately had taken ill. So the driver said he did not know, but he would look for an all-night place along the way. By that time, they had reached a section of the highway that was under construction, thus they had to take the parallel road. They drove a little further when the driver and my friend saw an open-air restaurant which seemed to be quite lively, just after a small town they had just passed, so they stopped there. The tour group exited and went about getting their refreshments. My friend helped them with translations, and he also got some food for himself and the driver. Less than an hour later, they were back on the bus and heading to Kuantan. The tourists were very happy with their stop because they said the food was excellent. A few days later, they were on their way back to the west coast with the same tour group, but it was daytime, and this time the regular driver was driving. A tour member asked my friend if they could stop at the place where they had stopped on their first day. Again, my friend said that he would do what he could. He told this to the driver. The driver asked him to describe the place, which he did. The driver's face went a little pale. A little later, they came to a place that seemed familiar to my friend, and the driver asked him, "Is that the place you mean?" Pointing to a patch of land where a rundown building stood surrounded by what was once a clearing with a few tables and broken chairs. There was also tall grass everywhere. My friend recognized the place. It was indeed the place where they had stopped a few days earlier. He turned to the tour group and informed them that they would not be able to stop at the place they went to earlier because it was only open at night. They sighed, but left it at that. Later, when they could talk in private, my friend asked the driver about the place. The driver informed him that the place had indeed been a restaurant with an outdoor eating area around it, but it had been abandoned for a year since something terrible happened there, and the business went under. The driver didn't know what that terrible incident was, but it led to more than one death. That stretch of highway has since been completed and the parallel road is only rarely used. I've used that road once to see if I could find the place. I followed my friend's description and I think I found the place, but there were only the remains of an old building there with tall grass all around it. Perhaps I should try going there at night, if only to see if the food was really that good. This is a personal story of mine. It happened around my freshman year of high school in 2011. I was around 13 or 14 years old, and my sister was 4 school grades younger than me. Every day I would come home on the bus, arriving at my house around 2:20 p.m. About a 10, maybe 15-minute ride from the high school to my house. I lived in the countryside, so my stop was ways away from the other neighborhoods that kids lived in. My house was directly next to a farm, and we only had a few neighbors, all older folk who stuck to themselves. Due to living in a rural area and having an extremely long dirt driveway, when I got home from school I had to walk for a few minutes down the driveway before I got to the back slider door. I would enter my house, lock the door behind me, and put my things down. Every day, the same routine when I got home. I would check on my dog's food and water and watch TV in the living room for a little while. My living room window had a perfect view of the front yard of my house as well as the driveway and where the bus would stop at the end of our driveway. Here's where things start to get interesting. While I watched TV in the living room, I would keep an eye out the window to watch for my sister to arrive home from middle school and make sure she got off the bus and up the driveway safely. She would get out of school around 2:30 and arrive at my house closer to 3 p.m. I would keep the door locked until I knew she would be home in a few minutes, and then I would unlock it so she can get in the house when she gets to the back door. I did that same thing this day just like every other day. While in the living room, I saw my sister's bus pull up to the end of the driveway, stop, and I watched her get off the bus. I remember she was wearing a North Face jacket, a scarf, and she had her fairly large teal backpack on, jeans and boots. She was walking up to the driveway and went out of my view, and I heard the back slider door open, close, and lock as she came into the house. From where I was sitting in the living room, I could see her walk past a doorway down the hallway to her room. I yelled out her name and asked her how school was, but got no answer. I got up to follow her and repeat my question. As I walked into the hallway, the very same hallway I had just seen her walk down, I noticed there were no lights on. The hallway was dark, and her room at the end of the hallway was also dark. I said her name again and heard nothing. I turned the light on and went into her room, and she wasn't there either. I figured maybe she went into another room in the house, but I could not find her anywhere. I went back out to check the back door, and to my surprise, it was still unlocked and slightly open, which didn't make any sense because I had just heard my sister close and lock the door when she got home. Confused, I closed the door and locked it, and went back to the living room to grab my phone. As I entered the room, the strangest thing happened. Out of the window, I saw my sister's bus pull up, stop, and I watched her get off the bus and walk up my driveway again. When she came in the house, I told her the weirdest thing just happened. I saw you get off your bus and come inside and lock the door, but you weren't anywhere in the house. Then I looked outside and saw you get off the bus again, and when I checked the door, it was unlocked and open. She responded by saying, "That's really weird, because the door was locked when I came inside, and you usually leave it open for me." I explained how I locked it because I thought she was in the house and thought it was really strange that the door was opened and unlocked without either of us manipulating it. Might I add, my sister was wearing a t-shirt, a scarf, leggings, and boots. Totally different outfit than I saw the first time. I didn't know what I was seeing or what had just happened. I had paranormal experiences in the past, stories that I would be happy to share, but this one really took the cake. I didn't know if this was some kind of entity mimicking my sister and trying to get my attention, or if this was some kind of glitch in reality. But I would love to hear some theories and stories that are similar to mine. I was 17 in 1992 when, due to financial difficulties, my family and I were forced to move into my grandmother's condominium in Claremont, California. We had come into some hard times, and my mother could no longer afford the house my two brothers and sisters and I grew up in. My grandmother shared this condo with my Aunt Rosie. My grandmother had just turned 90 while my aunt was somewhere in her late 80s. This was not enough room for all of us, so my brothers and I would take turns sleeping, either on one of two couches or on the floor. My aunt had two rooms that were considered her own, One was her bedroom, and the other was a room with a couch and a TV. On one particular night, I was the lucky one who got to sleep in this room. I was always more than happy to sleep on a couch rather than the floor. We all were. As I was readying myself to sleep, there was an overwhelming eerie sense of darkness that I could not deny. This was a different kind of darkness, one that I didn't understand then, but do now. This darkness was not physical, but spiritual, a blackness that could be felt. I tried not to trip out about this because I knew that when I awake, this feeling would be gone and I would feel silly. As it began to drift, I heard a deep guttural growl of what could only be 1 inch from my left ear. I jumped off the couch and flipped on the light. I was alone. Instantly I knew it was an evil spirit. If this thing were to have manifested flesh and blood, its lips would have practically been touching my ear when it growled. Naturally, this scared me, but as a Christian, I was taught that through Jesus Christ I have authority over such evil spirits. I decided that it was time to exercise this authority. I prayed and rebuked. To rebuke in a Christian sense is to command, in Jesus' name, the demonic spirit to leave. The Bible says that if you resist the devil, he will flee from you. I rebuked this thing a countless amount of times before. I felt that maybe it was safe to try to sleep once again. As I lay on the verge of crossing over into sleep for a second time, again 1 inch from my ear I heard something otherworldly. This time it wasn't a deep guttural growl, but a wicked, hissing, screeching-like angry whisper. What stood out to me from both of these voices is its scornful hatred for me. This hatred was not based on anything I did. This thing hated me for merely existing. This time my knee-jerk reaction was to throw my fists. When you can feel and hear a presence right next to you, 99% of the time when you're flailing your fists about, you're going to hit something. But once again, there was nothing there. Now I'm confused. I commanded this thing to leave, and not only did it not leave, but I think I angered it. I did not sleep until the sun came up. I recognized this as a test of my faith. About a week later, it was once again my turn to sleep in my Aunt Rosie's room. Was I concerned? You better believe it. But I hate being afraid, and I was determined to conquer this fear. I mustered up all my faith, prayed, and began to drift. This time there was no guttural growl, nor was there any demonic, windy hissing. I heard what sounded like a dungeon door slam shut, immediately followed by the mystifying, tormented scream of women. The scream was not like one who is quickly spooked and quickly brushes off her fright, but this expression of terror endured. I'd say it was a good 20 seconds of an enduring scream, loud and intense. It was like someone was failing to endure the flames of hell. Just like the previous week in this room, I sprung from the couch, but this time I bolted directly to the living room where my mother typically slept on a pull-out bed. She was still asleep, but how was that possible, I wondered. The scream was so loud I remember thinking that the entire condo complex should have heard it, but yet here's my mother, sleeping undisturbed. I woke her. "Mom, what was that?" She honestly didn't know what I was talking about. I was soon to find nobody heard this but me. Completely dumbfounded, I sat on a chair in the living room trying to make sense of these things in my head. The chair I sat upon was adjacent to the den where my brothers slept. I happened to look up into the darkness of the den, and I saw at knee level 2 beaming eyes of red staring back. It was too dark to make out any form of the body, but if there was enough light to see more, I am sure I would have seen this being in crawling position. At this point, I was so tired of being scared I simply stared it down, for God knows how long before it finally vanished. That night, I didn't sleep until the sun had risen. The fact that this being continued to pester me and not respond to my rebukes bothered me for some time to come. All these years it had become clear to me why that was. There I was, boldly engaging in spiritual warfare, but I was rebuking the symptoms of this oppression rather than the heart of this attack. I believe that I had confronted my Aunt Rosie and commanded this evil spirit to leave her. I would have gotten the results I was seeking. I don't believe my aunt was possessed, although she may have been, but she was certainly oppressed. My mother, on occasion, would catch my aunt, when she thought she was alone, looking at something that wasn't there and speaking to this something that could not be audibly heard. "I told you to leave me alone. Get out of here," Rosie would say. My mother would ask her, "Aunt Rosie, who are you talking to?" Realizing she was caught in this recourse like a child with her hand caught in a cookie jar, she would become sheepish and avoid giving a real answer by saying, "Oh, it was nothing." I was somewhat relieved when one night it was my brother Brian's turn to sleep in Aunt Rosie's room, and he, not yet knowing of my experiences in that room, shared in a lot of what I did. He did not hear any demonic voices in his ear, but did hear what sounded like a dungeon door slam shut, followed by a woman's scream. There was a strange comfort in knowing I was not alone in this. My sister, Michelle, went on to have her own experiences, even to the point where she saw a full-on apparition appear before her. This activity stopped one day. It wasn't until later that we realized that it all stopped once Aunt Rosie moved out of my grandmother's condo to live with her son. Evidently, she took this spirit, or spirits, with her. A few years later, it came to be that I had adopted a party lifestyle. A group of fellow party buddies and I liked to gather in remote locations in hopes of not running into an authority figure. We were all drinking and smoking, and many of us were underage. I remember hearing rumors about Satanists that would get together in this location and perform their rituals, whatever that might be. I didn't think much of it. My buddies and I were in the midst of having a great time, standing on an out-of-place slab of cement getting thoroughly loaded. I happened to glance behind me, and I saw something moving fast out of the corner of my eye. I turned to see, and it was a spirit of light. It moved at will and ran as if it were running in an incalculable speed. It happened so fast I wasn't able to get a good look at it. In shock, I turned to my friend, known as Red-Headed Dave, standing next to me to see if he saw what I saw. He had the same look of bewildered fear about his face that I was wearing. He asked me, "Did you see that?" He saw it longer and better than I did, and said there was what looked like a scrawny old man in light. We had no idea what to make of it. Our fellow friends missed it entirely as they were looking in another direction. Later that same night, Dave was with me when I returned to my grandmother's condo complex. We were walking around the area discussing how weird our earlier experience was when we came across a condo with a lemon tree in the backyard. Its branches were hanging over a wall over the street we were walking. We jumped and both grabbed a lemon. We decided to have a contest to see who can throw their lemon the furthest down the parking lot street. I realize as I'm writing this that this could very well be a you had to be there moment that you won't fully appreciate otherwise, but regardless, I'm going to write it out exactly as it happened. We both chucked our lemons as far as we could. It felt like I threw mine too far to the left and that I likely hit someone's condo or something. We thought he threw his too far to the right, likely over a fence into a field. It was too dark to see either way from our distance. We walked down the street thinking we were going to confirm the lemons didn't make it onto the street. As we walked down the street, we found our lemons in the middle of the street, perfectly lined up side by side. We were mesmerized. How was that possible? Our first thoughts were that these lemons must have rolled down an incline or slope and settled that way. We thoroughly inspected the street and could not find any such thing. This street was completely flat. How they ended up so diametrically and mathematically perfect right next to each other with less than an inch of separation really tripped us out. We contemplated on what the odds were that should happen, and we knew the odds must have been astronomical. The next night, Dave and I were out once again gallivanting around the condo, having had a few to drink. We came across the lemon tree with plans of repeating that contest. We laughed and talked about how weird the previous night was, and we knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that the results would be different this time. We chucked our lemons as far as we possibly could. This time we were even more certain we would never see those lemons again, having thrown them too far to the left or right. As we walked down the street, we joked about how we were going to completely trip out if we saw the exact same results, but we knew that would not happen. It was impossible. But when we came upon the lemons, only to find them exactly as they were the previous night, in the exact same spot with no logical explanation behind it, we said nothing. It was like the wind got knocked right out of our lungs and we simply forgot to breathe. We just stared at the lemons as if somehow they would reveal their secrets, but they did not. I pondered in my head and still do how long it would take for this to happen by chance if you took two random people and had them do this contest. How long would it take before they would get the same results me and Dave did? Maybe eternity. I do not doubt that it had something to do with the spirit we saw, but why would it behave this way, I will never know. Maybe just to blow our minds. A few years later, me and a couple of buddies were out late on a quiet, still night. My friend Pete decided to lead us to where a house once stood. While walking there, he gave us the backstory of this location. He said there was a man who owned this house that somehow managed to lose his mind, slaughter his family, and burn the house down along with him inside. I couldn't tell if the story was true or not because it sounded a bit cliché as far as horror stories go, but we went there, and the second we got to where we were standing in the middle of where this house once stood, an intense wind came out of nowhere. Not thinking much of it, I started messing around trying to sound macabre and said, "The spirits are telling us to get out," implying the wind was proof of this. I didn't really believe that, I was just trying to be funny. But what really tripped me out was the insane wind completely stopped the second we left a couple of feet from where the house once stood. There was no wind at all that day except for the 5 to 10 minutes of us being at that space. Was it a coincidence? Maybe, but it sure was weird. My final encounter with the supernatural of ill repute happened in 2005. By this time, I had left my partying days behind me and was happily married. Me and my wife decided to go out and see a movie. We weren't sure what we wanted to see, but we ended up settling for White Noise. This movie starred Michael Keaton and had to do with electronic voice phenomena. Keaton's character's wife dies, and he comes to find that by putting his TV on a frequency of white static, that by 3:30 every morning, he is able to make out voices in the static that tell him things, primarily from his recently deceased wife. The movie wasn't all that good. In fact, I have seen far scarier movies in my life done far better. Albeit, I will admit there was a couple of scenes that were a bit eerie, but this is what we're supposed to expect from a movie of this genre if done properly. Nothing out of the ordinary. That night, being a night owl, I was watching television when exactly at 3:30 the TV switched from what I was watching and went to pure white noise. That didn't just happen, I thought. I turned the TV off, woke up my wife who was sleeping in our bedroom and told her what had happened, and I asked her to pray. She pretty much rolled her eyes and said what she thought I wanted to hear, but I could tell she thought all the movie did was spark my imagination and that it will pass. The following night I was asleep in the bedroom and my wife was watching TV. The roles completely reversed. This time, she wakes me up at 3:30, scared out of her mind to tell me that the TV again went to white noise. She left the white noise on, too scared to be in the living room long enough to turn the TV off. As I'm walking down the hallway, I was looking at this white noise, remembering that in the movie, this was a way for the dead to communicate with the living. No way I was going to speak to the noise. God condemns necromancy in the Bible. If the dead truly wanted to connect with me, they can wait until I die. I turned the TV off. This began some investigation. I had to know if there was a way that one of us accidentally set the TV to do this. We came to find that it was possible to set our cable to change channels at specific times. The thing is, neither of us knew how to do this, and what are the odds one of us accidentally setting our cable to do this at 3:30 a.m. on the very night we saw that movie? Odds are so astronomical that one can call it impossible. Next time around, we made sure that the TV was turned off and were both in bed by the time 3:30 rolled around. I was certain this would take care of the issue. It did not. At exactly that time, we heard the sound of static coming from the living room. I go out there to find the TV had managed to turn itself on and went right into white noise. Scary. I was pretty much at a loss at what else to do the following night except unplug the TV. If spirits are using my TV to mess with us, maybe if I unplug their power source, all will return to normal. It did. What a strange experience that was. To this day, I wonder how it came to be that this paranormal incident came to be. I wasn't the least bit connected with the white noise movie. I didn't think much of it. Again, I've seen scarier movies, so why of all movies was this one chosen by some otherworldly entity? I wonder if a demon from my past encounters has attached itself to me with the goal to oppress. I believe I will never know the answers. It's been 14 years since my last experience, and I must say, I do prefer it this way. I've had a lot of experiences ever since I was a kid in my house. Every single one could be put down to coincidence or explained in some other way. Forgetfulness, older sister playing a prank, etc. But the sheer volume of experiences make me feel as if it's something more. I don't know what I hope to get in posting this, since it'll probably be drowned out in other stories. I just like talking about my boy. I had an imaginary kid as a child. His name was Andy. I was also a mild sleepwalker and terribly afraid of the dark. I told my parents that Andy, who usually lived in the attic, would come down on a night to make sure I was safe and I didn't leave my room if I got out of bed. I also believed that there was a monster that only Andy would keep me safe from. Now, I was a kid and my mom just put it down to an overactive imagination, which is fair enough. Then one day when I was a little older, we had a letter come to the house intended for a man who used to live here. They hadn't realized he didn't anymore. His name was Andrew, and, as I now know, he was dead. This could mean nothing. Andy is a common name. I have uncles called Andy, and I watched Andy's on TV, but it was enough of a creepy coincidence that it stuck with me. Here's some of my other experiences that I can think of off the top of my head. I had dolls when I was very little. I had this sort of jet ski thing that came with one doll that you could strap the legs into, but with my little grubby fingers I could never manage it. I got so frustrated once that I stormed downstairs to fetch my mom. She was too busy to help. When I came back upstairs, my doll was sitting upright in its little ski, all done up. The kitchen scissors went missing once and no one could find them. My mom joked, "It's that ghost again." So I also jokingly said, "Andy, we need those. Can you please have them back?" I found them laying out in the middle of my bedroom floor a minute later, said thanks, and left it at that. One time the Christmas decorations in the attic mysteriously organized themselves. We often leave them a tiny bit messy when we put them up there after Christmas. No one ever goes into that attic, but I don't know how they ended up all neat. I tried to hold a seance once because I have dumb idiot syndrome and I can remember this creepy feeling that made me need to stop. I know it's not the most exciting thing ever, but it was definitely a sensation that I had never felt before. One time when something else went missing, I called him terrible names and he knocked over things on my desk. This probably isn't convincing evidence, but I just feel a presence in this house. It's not threatening or anything, it just feels like someone's there, doing his own thing, living his best afterlife. It's entirely possible that, maybe, I'm just crazy. This was back when I was in high school. My mom used to say she heard and saw stuff, but I always thought that she was just exaggerating and being annoying. One day I was home alone playing video games in my room. I had my headset on. This was when Modern Warfare 2 was all the hype. So I had my volume up high, and through the headphones I hear someone yell, "Jacob," coming from the kitchen. I'm playing online, so I couldn't pause it, so I yelled back, "What?" Didn't get a response. Figured my mom needed help with the groceries or something, but I had 4 minutes left in the match. I'll finish up. I heard my name again. "Jacob." I yelled back. "I'm about to be done. I'll be there in a minute," I yelled. So the game finishes, and I go to the kitchen, and nobody is there. Go to my parents' room. Nobody in there. Looked in the driveway. No car. I call my mom and ask her where she's at, and she says that she's at Walmart and she'll be home in a bit. I could feel the blood draining from my face. I never told my mom because she would just freak herself out more, but that was scary. Does anybody have something similar happen to them? I'm not sure how this group works, but I have other stuff that had happened, and I don't want to cram it into one post. Update. I had just gotten out of the shower. Nobody was home. I had my towel on around my waist, and I had opened the door to let the steam out as I brushed my teeth. I started to hear the sound of plastic bags being moved around, and I heard the refrigerator door close. I figured my parents were home, so I shut the door. When I finished brushing my teeth, I went into my room, and as I walked in there, I could still hear the rustling of plastic bags. I kept thinking, man, they bought a lot of groceries, as I was changing. I finished putting on my clothes and went to the kitchen to help put up groceries. I stopped hearing the rustling at that point. I didn't see any bags or anything. I looked in the refrigerator, and it didn't look like groceries had been put in there. It had happened again. I went and sat outside for a while. I finally took off to a friend's house on my bike and called my parents a little later. Sure enough, they had been at my sister's house the whole time. I wanted to convince myself that I was hearing things again, but I remember it to this day how clear I heard it, and it still gives me chills. My sister is quite a bit older, so my house was always just my dad, mom, and I, so I always had my own room. My mom always liked the antique look of the house, so for some reason, when I needed a computer chair, she got me this big red leather computer chair. It's real comfy, but it was huge. I hated how much room it took up, but I kept it anyways because I liked how it made me look like a villain. Sometimes I'd spin around in it when people came in my room and pretended I was wearing an eye patch and petting a cat. I was facing my window, away from my computer area where the chair was sitting, when I woke up one night to the sound of squeaking, like a long squeak, like it always made when I would turn around in it, and then it stopped. I was awake, but I had my eyes closed. I knew it was the chair, but I didn't turn around because I guess the fear froze me up. I heard it again, and this time I opened my eyes, but still didn't turn around to hear it. I heard it one more time, but it was in sections, such as multiple squeaks. I just closed my eyes after that and eventually fell asleep. I didn't even want to turn around. A couple of months passed after that. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, putting on my shoes to go to the gym. The edge of my bed is directly in front of the bedroom door, and in front of it is the kitchen. It's a very small one, more like a small hallway with a fridge and sink and counters and stove. When I looked up, I saw 6 fingers, which looked like 2 hands were holding the door, but it was at eye level, so it had to have been a child's hand, and I saw the very top of what looked like black hair. The way the hands and top of the head were made, it looked like it was holding itself up horizontally. Now, before you ask, no, I did not do a double take. It was not something I kind of just glanced. I stared at it for a good 3 seconds. I kicked the door closed as hard as I could and took off running to my friend's house. I was a 6'2", 295-pound defensive end for my school. I didn't scare easily, but I was scared that day. I left for college after I graduated and didn't experience anything there, but then my dad started calling me. My dad's an old-school construction worker, very serious and always rolled his eyes when he heard my mom was seeing stuff. I did too, till they started happening to me. So when my dad called me one night and told me he was experiencing things, I knew I wasn't crazy. So when I left for college, it was just my dad and mom at the house. He tells me that he woke up at 5 a.m. like he always does, started his pot of coffee, and got dressed for work. When he got back, the coffee pot was off the coffee maker and didn't think much of it because he figured he had just forgotten to put it on the machine since he was probably still groggy from waking up. A couple of days later, same thing happened except the pot was closer to the sink. Again, he wasn't one to believe in stuff like that, so he just shrugged it off as him doing it and blaming it on being in automatic mode in the morning. It happened again a third time, but this time the coffee pot was on the floor. When he saw that, he ran to my mom's room to see if she wasn't playing some trick on him. She was stone asleep. He drained the coffee, and in the coffee pot was some change. 37 cents, I think he said. He was freaked out. I don't have any little brothers or kids who might be playing tricks on him. Currently, it's just my mom and dad. A couple of years passed by. I have a daughter. She's about 3 years old. I had just gotten divorced, so I moved in with my parents till I got back on my feet and got my own place. My daughter was playing with her little kitchen playset, and I'm in the kitchen making her some food. I hear her talking in her baby voice. Mine. It's mine, my toy. I think she has an imaginary friend, so I don't think anything of it. A couple of minutes pass, and she let out a yelp and starts crying. So I run to her, thinking she had smashed a finger on a door or something, and I pick her up and hug her and ask her what's wrong, and she says, "He's scary." And I said, "Who?" And she points towards the kitchen. So I ask her simple questions. Is he tall or short? Using my hands as a measuring stick. She points at the tall gesture. I asked her what color, pointed at white. She said no. I pointed at red. She said no again. I pointed at black, and she said yes. I asked her if it was pretty or ugly, and she said ugly. A couple of weeks pass by again, and my daughter is sleeping with me in my old room. I feel her sliding down towards the bottom part of the bed. My initial reaction is that she is moving around, but it was a smooth feeling like she was being pulled by her feet, so I sit up as soon as I realized it, and she was fast asleep. I get up, turn on the lights, and start looking around the room, and found nothing. I don't know if my mind was playing tricks on me because I had just woken up out of nowhere, but it felt real to me. Maybe I was dreaming, but after everything that had happened over the years, I didn't think it was logically explainable anymore. I moved out shortly after that. I never saw or heard anything again where I live now. My parents still live there, and my mom says she hears things every now and then, but nothing huge like what I've seen and heard. My people, the Malays or Javanese, have this belief that there are 7 people in the world who look exactly like you. Some also believe that if you meet all of them, you will die. Personally, I do not believe this. However, my family members and I and my close friends have experienced seeing these doppelgangers numerous times. The first time it happened to me, albeit indirectly, it was when my brother saw my daughter and I in London. He was walking towards a tube station near Hyde Park when he heard a child's voice behind him. He turned and saw a girl walking towards him. He was pleasantly surprised because he thought the girl was my daughter, and behind her, he saw someone who he thought was me. According to him, both the daughter and the man looked exactly like my daughter and I. It was not until they got within a few feet away when they all realized that they were not who they thought they were. Apparently, the dad said my brother looked exactly like his own brother, which was why his daughter thought he was her uncle. My brother told him that he too thought that they were almost identical to my daughter and me. He even showed them our pictures, and the man was extremely surprised. The second time this happened was at a shopping complex near my place. My wife and her best friends were having lunch together at a Nando's, a roast chicken place. My wife's friend then said she saw me coming down an escalator and walking towards them. Great, my wife snickered. Let's get him to pay for lunch. So they waited for me to come nearer, but when I got within a few feet, they both realized that it was not me, and was very surprised at how the man closely resembled me. The third time was also at a shopping complex near my place, but a different complex. A close friend who was also a former student was having a drink at a cafe when she saw me a couple of tables away. She wanted to join me, but before she got up from her place, she picked up on something that made her sit back down. She decided to scrutinize the man a little more and realized that he was not, in fact, me. She said there were minor differences. He was slightly smaller and his glasses were different. She remembered this because the last time we met, which was not long before this incident, I had just come back from the optician and I was telling her about the good deal that I got from the optician for my new pair of glasses. I also showed her the glasses. She took a photo of the man and sent it to me. I'm sure I have the photo still somewhere in my external hard drive. The fourth time happened in Malacca, a town and state south of Kuala Lumpur. The town and the state shared the same name. I was at a hotel for a conference. It was in the afternoon and I was making my way back to my hotel room when a man stopped me. He addressed me by a name that I did not recognize and he acted like we were old friends. He asked why he had not seen me at Zouk for ages. Zouk is a club in Kuala Lumpur. I told him that he had me mistaken for someone else and that I had never been to Zouk, even though it is actually not far from my place. He was silent as he scrutinized me up and down for quite some time before exclaiming, "Jesus Christ, you're not—" the man's name, which I had forgotten at this time. He was embarrassed and very apologetic, which I said he had no reason to be. He then excused himself and went down the corridor, still shaking his head. In perhaps a not-so-related incident, my father was at an airport in Delhi when a man dressed in military uniform came up to him, snapped to attention, and saluted him. The man said, "Major Bahadur, sir." My father was surprised. He then told the man that he was not Major Bahadur. The man told him that the major was his former commanding officer and had since retired. Moreover, he informed my father that he looked exactly like the retired major. So, I have had 4 indirect encounters with my doppelganger. According to the superstition, if I have 3 more indirect encounters, or if I encounter this man directly, I'm a goner. So if you guys don't hear from me anymore, you know what happened. If others had told me that there was a man who looks exactly like me, I might not have believed them, but the people who have seen my doppelganger are my own brother, my wife, her best friend, and a close friend. I trust that they would not have been fooled by what they saw so easily. Throughout my childhood, I've had a few minor experiences which I believe have been paranormal. By sharing, I'm looking for advice, answers, people with mutual encounters. When I was little, about 3 or 4, I distinctly remember being terrified of a shadow which was on my bedroom wall every night. I was too scared to sleep without a lamp on, and I would always wake up to see the shadow on the wall. It was never there when I went to sleep, only when I woke up feeling scared in the middle of the night. The shadow was a profile of a woman's neck and head, and the distinguishing feature was a big ponytail, exactly like Polly Pocket. I would always wake up my mum, but she would, as a non-believer, explain to me that it was just a shadow of one of my toys and dolls and tell me to go back to sleep. After we moved house, I never saw the shadow ever again, and after recently asking my mum about it, she said that she vaguely remembered it. A few years later, when I was about 5 or 6, I had terrifying nightmares specifically revolving around religion. 2 examples I remember are as follows. The first dream I remember in vivid detail was about angels. I was standing in my backyard with my class from school when we looked up over the hill and we saw angels flying around in a circle, making a weird type of music. The teacher asked us, "What are they doing?" as though she was teaching a lesson, and one of the girls in my class said, "They're laughing." And I woke up in terror. The next dream was about Jesus. I remember it so clearly because of how scared I was when I woke up. I was holding a crucifix with a gold Jesus figure on it. The Jesus started talking to me. I was scared, so I threw it in the garden. I was outside again, and I remember it saying, "No, Emma, pick me up." I picked it up, and the next thing I remember from the dream was I was in the mall with the crucifix, and everything was blurring around us. It was talking to me, but I can't remember what it was saying. Next thing I recall was waking up crying. After a while, I stopped having these dreams, and now if I'm in a nightmare, I can literally wake myself up by telling myself I'm dreaming. I had a pretty normal childhood after that until I was about 9 or 10. Once again, we had moved house and I was a happy child. Small things happened in this house, but thinking back on them now, I feel uneasy. I used to take a bottle of drink with me to bed at night and still slept with a lamp on and a blanket I called Blanky. I did this until I was about 15. I would wake up in the middle of the night and my bottle of drink would be in the middle of my floor and Blanky was folded into a neat pile next to my head on my pillow. I asked both my parents if they were doing this and they both said no, and that I was probably doing it in my sleep. Yeah, right. My sister also complained of feeling scared of the house and had to go to therapy because she honestly believed that there was a man in the roof. I have spoken to her since, and she says that she was just a kid with a vivid imagination. I also had an experience of falling asleep, to be woken up by a distinct whisper in my ear of someone saying, "Emma." I was also afraid of my parents' room in this house. They had a built-in wardrobe with mirrored doors, and I hated their whole room. We moved again when I was in year 10 to a house that was undoubtedly haunted or possessed really negative energy. I witnessed a door closing by itself, which I told myself was just because of a draft, and I was mentally at my worst. I was extremely depressed and remember contemplating ending my life to the point I even wrote my family a goodbye letter. After we moved, I was fine. I never thought about that again and was mentally doing well and so much better. In this house, however, I did feel scared being by myself, and once experienced an object in the kitchen, a metal object that could not have been carried by the wind, fall onto the floor by itself. Nothing other than that really happened. I just felt uneasy. I always have. Before we moved out of this house, I was in the shower, home alone at about 8 p.m. My family was at our new house unboxing our kitchen stuff, so I was alone except for my puppy who was in his playpen in the kitchen. When I was under the water, I heard our door open and close. It was a loud door, so I could hear its trademark squeak and slam. I assumed it was my dad picking up more boxes, so I continued my shower normally. When I got out, my mom and sister got home about 5 minutes later. I asked them what Dad had come back for, and they said they had been at the other house with them all night. I told them what had happened, and we searched the house and found nothing. Needless to say, we were all pretty shaken up, but I've only heard the door open and close once, so either, if it was a person, they had been in the house for a while and were leaving or coming in, but there was no one in our house. I still feel uneasy sometimes in my home. I see shadows out of the corner of my eye and hear noises before I go to sleep. I usually sleep with a fan on, so I can't hear the random clicks or knocks around my room. I have spoken to one of my more spiritual friends about my experiences, and she believes I may be a little psychic. Honestly, I feel like I'm just paranoid, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. Maybe it was the house that was haunted, but for whatever reason, I saw my husband's doppelganger at least twice while we lived there. The first time was after I drove him to work. It was a 45-minute drive each way, and I was just getting back home. When I pulled up in front of the house, there he was, standing on the porch smoking a cigarette. Same black hat and red shirt he had on when I dropped him off. I looked away for a second to put the car in park, and when I looked back, he was gone. I hopped out of the car and looked on either side of the house for him. I was so confused. I called and asked him where he was. Obviously, he was still miles away at work. I thought I was going crazy. The second time, I was not alone. We had a friend of ours over at the house who I'll refer to as W. Now, W and I were hanging out in the kitchen eating munchy food, and my husband was outside for whatever reason, I forget. Before I continue, the house was set up like this. The kitchen is the first room you walk into from the front door and front porch. It's the only room on the bottom floor. There's a set of wooden stairs in the kitchen that leads upstairs to the rest of the house. In front of the house is the main road, so you have to walk off the porch onto the sidewalk and around to the side of the house to get to the yard. So we're both in the kitchen, but I'm leaning over the counter eating leftover halupkis, and W's at the kitchen table facing the door. My husband bursts through the door and runs through the kitchen, slamming the door shut behind him. I only see him out of my periphery. After a second, W says to me, "Where did he just go?" And a chill goes down my spine. I turn around and he's not there. I don't even bother checking the stairs because they're very loud and I would have heard him. I knew what it was. I say to W, "That wasn't him," and go towards the door to check outside and prove to both of us he was still out there. And this is where it gets hilarious. W grabs a hold of the back of my shirt terrified and yells, "Don't open that door." I bravely open the door and yell for my husband, who responds, "Yeah?" and comes walking around the house from the side yard. Our simple friend then says to him, "Dude, someone just ran into your house," causing my husband to go into attack mode, running into the house searching for the intruder. I know this is ridiculous because W didn't act as if a stranger ran into the house when we were in the kitchen. In fact, I think he even said something to him before asking me where he went. I stop them both and say, Wait a minute, W, what did you see?" And he looks at my husband and says, "I saw you." At that moment, we all realized what happened. We saw something supernatural. We were thoroughly freaked out, and W refuses to talk about it to this day. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.